Hello, Joylist people and humans of the internet. I am here with my collaborator, Tony Bacigalupo, and we're here to give you the download of what we have been working on for the past few months in terms of growing the Joylist, creating a directory of belonging, and how the heck we even started working together in the first place. And we're going to give you the rundown from the time that I posted on Facebook looking for someone to where we're at right now, what challenges we learned from all of it, because I know there's a lot of people out there who want to support what we're doing, and there's a lot of community builders who are curious about how I've started to grow the Joy List and how I've started to ask for help from other people. So we're here to talk about it all.
Yeah, and Jillian, I appreciate you having me along for this. And it's been so fun to spend so much time with you the last couple of months. It's been really, really great.
Yeah, so I remember there was a meeting we were having at Hugh Kitchen by Union Square, and afterwards I realized I think we'd been sitting down for maybe 6 hours without moving, and we had so much fun. We were laughing so hard, and I stood up and was like, why do I have to pee so bad?
Like, why is it dark outside?
6 hours straight. Yeah, and it was dark outside. We were in some sort of crazy time warp. So it's a good sign that we still like each other.
Yeah, it's true. So maybe it would help, Jillian, if we took a step back in terms of this timeline where we talk about where your head was at when you first started kind of posting, asking for help, which I think was in September now, maybe end of August. Mm-hmm. And what you were like, what was your relationship to the Joy List at that point, roughly speaking, and like what was prompting you to go that direction?
Yeah, good question. So in September, I was feeling like, well, I know that the Joy List is a really important thing, and it's a project that so many people consistently tell me makes a difference in their lives in New York City, and they think it's really beautiful work that needs to spread. As someone who ironically was running it by myself, one, I felt lonely. I had that classic lonely entrepreneur syndrome. And also, I was aware of my own limitations. I am not someone who comes from a business background. I am not someone who can confidently say that they know how to scale a project or get sponsors or any of the things that would be necessary to actually transition the Joy List from being a side project that I do for no income and a thing that I'm not scaling, I'm keeping in New York City, to making the Joy List a thing that touches multiple cities and I also make an income from, which is what my goal was. So I posted on Facebook and was just like, hey, if I did have, it was so indirect. It was like, if I did happen to want a collaborator for the Joy List, who would you recommend? And a confession is that I was hoping that people would tag you specifically.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So I was too shy to ask you myself because I was thinking, Tony has so much experience. This is never a thing he would want to work with me on, or he doesn't have time, or it's not a big enough project. So I was like, oh, maybe someone will tag him and he'll see it, but it feels like less of a risk. Like, I'll let him come to me if he wants to do it. And then, of course, like 4 or 5 people tagged you and you did want to talk. So that's my confession.
I feel like this is so incredible, such a teachable moment for anybody else listening, that at the same time I was sitting here and I remember at that point thinking that just getting the two of us together to hang out was such a hard thing to do. It's, typical New York busy, but look, we've been, keeping trying to hang out for, years. And like, I remember we had lunch at like a Greek restaurant, like maybe a year,
yes.
Remember, like 15 months ago? And like, we didn't see each other again for like 6 months after that. It was, and I definitely had this mindset of like, oh, I'd love to spend more time with Jillian, but she's too busy killing it with the Joy List. And she's absolutely like just rocking it right now. And she's too busy to hang out. So it's funny. I had this story in my head of like, you were grooving too much and to have time for us to hang out. So there you go. check your assumptions on the people that you admire and that you want to spend time with. That's my my takeaway.
Yeah, that's the thing that I hear from leaders a lot is that they're like, oh, I feel like people assume that I'm busy all the time. And actually, I would love to be invited to more things, which is also definitely not true for everyone. There are some people who definitely just don't have the time. Uh, but don't assume that story is true.
Yeah. And I would say
Like,
probably
it can be intimidating.
adding that element of vulnerability probably broke the ice a little bit more. Like if we were being totally circumspect, then I wouldn't know that there's a real opening there, you know? And so opening up a little bit to say like, hey, I really could use somebody else's brain on this to really jam with me. And, you know,
Hmm.
some of it's just timing too, but yeah,
Yeah.
that was an awesome message, Jillian. You're good at asking for help.
Thank you. And so after that, I remember we had a few meetings with each other, and it was so to zoom out a little bit, I was at a point where I'm in therapy and I talk to my therapist about how I struggle with the joy list. And sometimes I wonder why I'm doing it or I want to give up. And a thing that she said to me, I actually haven't told you this either, Tony.
This is great.
The thing that she said to me, she was like, give yourself permission to say that you're going to stop doing the joy list. And it was this really interesting thing where for like 2 weeks, this was also when I went to CMX Summit and spoke. So it felt very strange to be talking about the joy list. There was this 2-week period where I was actually thinking to myself, I'm going to stop doing the joy list. I need to give it up. And I was grieving. I was crying. Just imagining giving it up was so hard. But it was also very freeing because then it took the project from being, this is a thing that I have to do because people tell me I have to do it, to, okay, not doing this is an option.
Yeah.
And if I continue doing it, it is by my own choice. I'm not forcing myself to do it. It's my own choice. And really that made all the difference. And then talking to you, I don't know what meeting number it was when we were talking, but you said like we.
I remember I said we, yeah.
Yes. And either I did cry or I almost started crying and was just like, I did not know how long I had been waiting for someone to refer to this project in the we, because I need that so bad.
Yeah. Well, because then you felt not alone in this.
Yeah. It's like, it's very ironic that me, someone who's running a newsletter around community and loneliness, is running the project by herself. Like, I clearly see how that does not make any sense.
It makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think people are passionate about things that they're trying to figure out for themselves. And so, and that's important. An important part of what the work we've done since is incorporating and weaving in our own unfinished journeys in seeking belonging into the work that we do. That
Yeah.
we're not talking about loneliness and belonging and community because we're masters of it. We're talking about it because we're hungry and we care about it. We want more of it. We want to understand it better for ourselves. And I think that's a big part of what drives what we do.
Totally. And collaborating with each other as well. Like for me, speaking for myself, every type of work I've done since I graduated from college was me working on my own. Pretty much me being a freelance writer or a speaker. So it was always just me. Like I worked with editors or people like that, but it was pretty much just me. And so being in relationship with you and collaborating together has been really juicy and interesting to say, right, there's the dynamic of somebody else. Like we're in a type of relationship, and navigating that relationship is part of this work that I feel like we've been trained, or I've been trained to want to stand out as an individual and be really special and do everything on my own and not ask for help. And so working with you has been really cool to say, if I actually want to create a project that is long lasting and sustainable and helps a lot of people without me burning out, I need to bring in other people and I
Yeah.
need to learn how to navigate that.
Yeah. And that accountability loop is so powerful, especially when it's somebody that you respect, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I realized actually looking back on this, that all of the best stuff that I've done has always been done with another person as a collaborator, partner, somebody else was involved. And so many of the things that I've wanted to do, that I've tried to do, and that I've failed at, I've largely done trying to do totally on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And just for example, working with you these last few months, when we came into a situation where, for example, we needed a pitch deck for somebody we were going to talk to,
Yeah.
I knew, okay, the meeting's on Friday. I need to go over this with you on Thursday at the latest. So then I
Mm-hmm.
know, okay, 2 p.m. Thursday, I'm going to meet with Jillian and I need to have a pitch deck ready. You better believe I'm going to get that pitch deck done. I'm going to do really great work because I want to
Yeah,
honor.
and you did. I could not believe how good those pitch decks were and how quickly you made them. Like, perfect example of a thing that me, someone who's never made a pitch deck before, I was like, what is this? This is amazing.
Well, and if I were doing that by myself, for myself, for something I wanted to do, I, I mean, I have those files on my computer. You know how many, pitch deck files I have on my computer that's like 2 slides, or that's like a copy of another presentation, and I never change. I have so many, of those dead files, of dead ends, because there was nobody to share it with. There was no feedback loop for it. There was no one
Mhm.
expecting it. And the fact that you were counting on that made all the difference in me wanting to really show up for you and for us and what we were working on getting done. And it felt good. It felt good to have that dynamic.
Completely. I think the dynamic, I don't know if this is true but for me, the fact that we started to meet with people who in my brain I saw as like very powerful, very influential. I think if I was working on my own, I probably would have made excuses to not do it or maybe to not follow up because it was so scary and new for me. And nobody would know. They wouldn't say, what the heck? You had that connection to that person and you totally didn't answer that email because no one would have any idea.
Yeah.
But with you, it's like, oh man, we just connected with this person. Of course, I'm going to respond to this email because it's good for me and Tony and the project that we're working on.
It's true. It's true. There are a couple of those things we're putting off right now. Actually, I know I've got a couple on my list. But what's fun is that you like I could just forget about them, but you won't. So you can be
I'm
like,
like,
hey, dude,
hey, where's that email? Hey.
yeah, like let's get that thing. Yeah, absolutely. um, so what do you think? Should we talk more about kind of what we've been trying to do, what we've been zeroing in on with our work?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, okay. So we started sitting down, and I would say that at first, what I realized was that if we were going to try to work together, I had to get to know you better. We had to get to know each other better, and I had to understand just where you're at. And again, this is where checking assumptions come in, and I'm still unpacking assumptions I didn't realize I had about you and your experience and what you've thought of or what you've tried. And
Mhm.
it's fun to just uncover those things. But at first, it was really, okay, Jillian, tell me your deal. Like
I'm so
what?
curious what those are.
Well, okay. So for example, we're fast forwarding a bit here, but things that we could do to grow the joy list,
Mhm.
where there's a bunch of very basic fundamental things that could help grow the joy list pretty quickly without a lot of work, that neither of us maybe have ever really thought before, or maybe you've thought of it but you haven't tried it or whatever, where I would
Mhm.
say that I probably had an implicit assumption of Jillian's probably gone through all this already and made these decisions. And I have these, yeah, and there's probably stuff I know that you don't know that would be useful for you to know, that if I told you like, oh well, what about this, then all of a
Mhm.
sudden we uncover something really effective. Um, and so I feel like what we did do right though was we started with the fundamentals of where are you at? Where, I asked you like a bunch of questions, like how many subscribers do you have and how many different channels, and where do you charge money for things and what's working, what's not, all this stuff. So we got a pretty good lay of the land. And what we ended up with was this question of, well, in order to get anywhere with this, we have to grow it. That where it's at right now is exciting and people love it, but not necessarily at the level that people are going to throw a lot of money at it such that you could focus on it full time. And
Mm-hmm.
so we need something to make this bigger. And we didn't like the idea of just trying to get people to help grow the Joy List or just using traditional marketing methods. I think we could have done that, but we're very mission driven people. And I think
Yeah,
also in terms of my own involvement, there needed to be room for the Joy List to be bigger in order for there to be room for someone other than you to occupy this space, right? And
totally.
because Joy List up till now is it's your baby, right? But when we talk about, well, what does it look like for the Joy List to be maybe offering much more diverse offerings in New York? What does it look like for the Joy List to be all over the world? That's such a much bigger challenge and opportunity that there's so much work to be done that there's plenty of room for, there's plenty of work to go around.
Yeah.
And I think to better understand why we were going to try to do that, we had to really zero in on the mission and what it is that we're trying to achieve in a very visceral, human, personal way. And that would drive everything that we do from there. That
Mm-hmm.
if we are driven from a place of ambition and values towards a better world that we can articulate, then that helps to rally us around what we're doing with the Joy List, but it also helps to motivate other people that we're friendly with to be our compatriots in working towards this together. And that was part of what we wanted, was to motivate these other people that you've already met to work with you on
Mm-hmm.
something, right?
Totally. I think that speaks to a conclusion that we've come to more recently is pretty much, and tell me if you disagree with this, that the goal of what we're doing isn't just to grow the Joy List, it is to empower people to have the tools to feel more like they belong to themselves and to their community. Because really, this is the thing that I've just been mulling over so much, is how much our culture is centered around the star and the celebrity, and how easy it would be for me and for you to say, okay, we're the amazing founders of this thing. Give us all the attention and press. We as individuals are going to host these events, just us, nobody else. And before we know it, it's a cult of personality with nobody contributing but the two of us. And this is a project that's about community. And so if we say, okay, if we start to take the focus away from ourselves as individuals and towards the people who keep reaching out to us saying, how can we help? And saying, oh, okay, there's this amazing thing called Death Over Dinner. Here's exactly how you can host it. There's this thing called Soulful Supper. Here's what you do. Skip the small talk. Here's exactly how you run it. And suddenly it's going from us to all of these people creating the exact type of spaces that we could feature in the Joy List to begin with.
Yeah, and that's part of a larger philosophical message that I've been caring about for a long time, is showing people that they have the power to
Mm-hmm.
enact change in a small scale with whatever they have, right? Like when I consult someone on how to start a co-working space, somebody might say, like, I have this dream and it's going to be like 1,000,000 square foot thing, and it's going to be co-living and recording studio and all this stuff. But I don't have any of that right now, and I'm scared to death because I don't know how to get any of it started. All of
Mm-hmm.
my conversations start the same way. Like, figure out who you have within your reach now, have some conversations, ask them out for coffee, get a few people together to just hang out and talk. And that's the foundation of any good community and any good movement. Just showing people that they have the power with what they have today, and it doesn't have to be complicated or hard to get that rolling. I think that's a major part of the shift that we want to make, is to show people how much power they have to really do good. And something like loneliness, right? When we talk about the epidemic of loneliness, it's an epidemic that has solutions that we all have the ability to implement today. We're not waiting for some crazy, scientific breakthrough. We don't need a major policy change in Washington, right? We can solve this problem with the tools we have. And you and I, but you with the Joy List, you've been finding these solutions for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a big inspiration to me to see, there's so many answers to this problem out there. And relatively few people know that these answers exist. And so I think, really getting into that's something we could just chew on for a really long time.
Totally. It's tied into kind of this idea of the world is what you see, and you can't find something if you don't know it exists. I was talking to a friend this week and talking about how the kind of me creating the joy list was based off of me constantly hearing people say it's hard to make friends as an adult. It's hard to make friends in New York City. New York City is a lonely place. And just stating it as facts, so many people over and over again. And I wanted to, and this is a big reason why I started the newsletter, is I wanted to say, you just haven't met the right people yet. You just haven't found the right spaces. New York City is huge. Your community is very small.
Yeah.
What if you expand to something you haven't done before? I'm going to make it really easy. Here's exactly where you go. This is where you can go and meet people who suddenly make it feel like it's easy to make friends in New York.
Yeah.
And New York City is a really beautiful, connected place. You just have to be in the right places.
Yeah. Peter Block talks about that in Community, right? He talks about like stuck communities versus, I forget what the language is, but essentially if you're organizing culturally around things are broken and there's problems, then you're perpetuating the existence of those problems, even as you work towards addressing them, just by constantly building it up, building it up, building it up. Oh, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, as opposed to trying to create a community where you're living the solution. And so even just that, making that language shift, and from like in your personal life, it's huge, but in a community life as well. I know, I've never been a fan of winter, and I've always been fascinated by the Scandinavians and how they're culturally, they have a better relationship with winter. And, it gave rise to this whole hygge trend. And one of the things I read recently about it was that ultimately, it's not what they do to cope with winter better. It's literally how they talk about it and how they think about it. We talk I've heard a lot of talk in New York about like winter sucks. Oh, it's so bad, blah, 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 blah. And, what if we just stopped complaining about it and said, what, maybe it's not so bad. Okay, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but I'm not going to let it get me down. And so there's just that mindset shift. So if we could do that the same way, with these other things, to say, there's a lot of lonely people in New York. It's really easy to get stuck in your apartment, ordering Seamless and not talking to people. But this is also a city with unbelievable opportunity for you to find your people. I mean, really, in New York especially, but I mean, I think it's true anywhere when you start to look at these tools that we've been discovering, but especially in New York. And I don't want to make this too much of a rah-rah New York, but New York's pretty awesome in that way, right? But what I do like is that what we're seeing happening in New York, many of the things we're finding are things that can be happening anywhere. There's no reason why they couldn't be. And I'm certain once we start engaging the many people who have reached out to you to help out, that, because I've seen this in the co-working world too, that there are people all over the world who are coming up with really great ideas, who need to have their ideas shared with more people and more visible. And, so I don't want to pretend that New York's the only place where good ideas are coming from. They're coming from everywhere. And I've seen that in co-working, where there's just so many cool, so many amazing people out there coming up with great ideas. The more we can facilitate the spread of that, the better.
Amen.
So you came up with a really cool premise for kind of like a big, hairy goal for this year, which is under development, not really ready for public consumption yet, but I think it would be useful for us to talk about our process of trying to work towards what it is that we're trying to do. Do you agree? Yeah.
Totally. And I would love to talk about how we got to that place, because I was talking to a friend and realized how amazing of an example this story is of what happens when you just keep saying yes to things. So kind of how we got to me pitching this big goal is I got a message on Facebook from someone named Kurt, and he was like, hey, I'm part of this organization. I'm looking for new members. I've had a few people recommend you, and I would love to get coffee. And so I go, I get coffee with this person, and he's like, oh, by the way, I saw online that you're going on a trip to California soon. When you're there, you should go and meet with the founder of our organization. And I was like, okay. So when I was in California, get breakfast with the founder of the organization. And he's like, cool, you're awesome. When you get back to New York City, there's this dinner party. You should go to that dinner party. And I'm like, okay. So get back to New York City. I can bring a +1 to this dinner. I ask you to come with me. We go. It's some of the most just confident, amazing, influential people I've ever been around, that's for sure. And we get to a point in the dinner where they say, hey, as an organization, we try and tackle a few big projects every year. Does anyone have ideas for projects? And I'm expecting a bunch of people to pitch things. And I've kind of had this idea mulling around in my head. So I just raise my hand and I'm like, yeah, what if we try and make 1 million people less lonely in 2020, or help 1 million people find belonging? And the table's kind of just like, great, awesome. And someone says something along the lines of, create a pitch deck, create a budget, figure out how much money you need, let's get rolling.
Yeah.
I was just like, wait, what? No one's gonna tell me to wait on this or anything. They're just gonna expect me to start doing it. And this led to just a series of some of the most bananas meetings with people that 6 months ago, I would never believe that I would be sitting down with these people, and people who have connections to celebrities and all of these things that seemed totally out of my reach 6 months ago. And suddenly I'm sitting with people who they could make a phone call to someone who I've like had a crush on since I was 5 years old. Like, it's nuts. And if I said no at any of those moments, it was like, oh, that feels too scary, or I don't know, that feels like I won't fit in, we wouldn't be here now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. And so I think that speaks to the importance of saying yes, for one, and for two, not being afraid to put out something ambitious. Mm-hmm. I've seen such an incredible vacuum of leadership in so many aspects of society and in industries, communities I've been in, where you can have a room full of people who are ready to take action, and all it takes in the right context, when you leave your ego out of the room, right? If you do it well, is just say, well, what if we tried this crazy ambitious idea? Mm-hmm. And there's so many people are ready to, I just used this phrase recently, I'm sure there's a better word, leader followers. So like people who are leaders, but they need to follow a higher leader who's got like the bigger picture kind of thing. Like when I started my co-working space, it wasn't my idea to come up with a co-working space. Other people had that idea, but I was willing to be the leader of a project like that in New York. And so I needed somebody else to follow, but I was ready to be a leader locally. You know, and there's so many people at that level that just one person who's really ready to say, you know, screw this problem, let's go fix it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sick of hearing this loneliness epidemic problem. Let's help 1 million people find belonging in 2020. All of a sudden, you see people like, what? A solution? Leadership? Yeah. Let's do it, you know? And now everybody's ready to get active. So I'm glad that you kind of planted that flag, because that really galvanized a lot of action.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to talk about kind of one of the issues that we faced with that problem?
Sure. Yeah.
I'll speak in generalities.
I'll go first. I'll say one of the problems immediately that comes up is, well, how the heck do you reach 1 million people? What does that even mean to help 1 million people find belonging? How do you define belonging? How do you define loneliness? How do you get people to, like, you know, do we have to send out a survey and have 1 million people say, yes, I belong now? Or, you know, like, so there's a big question around like how do you even define what success looks like? And then just literally, like, I ran the numbers in a spreadsheet to figure out what does it actually take to reach 1 million people in terms of getting people to show up to an event or whatever. And it can be a daunting number.
Yeah. And that also along those lines, thinking about, okay, are there institutions that we don't want to work with? And it's like, okay, what are the morals of this campaign? Is it a million people finding belonging outside of organized religion? Is it in organized religion? Do we partner with religious organizations? What kind? And I think we still have some more work to do around this because it's not immediately in our face yet. But like, okay, if someone submits this type of gathering versus this type of gathering, which ones do we accept and not, and why? And what rules come from that? And a really good example of this is that I went to and this I will say by name, a church planting conference called Exponential, which is a really fascinating gathering for pastors. And they have a conference in March in Orlando that I will hopefully be attending, or hopefully leading a workshop at. And the idea of being in a space with 5,000 pastors and saying, wow, okay, I'm a person who does not identify as Christian. And if I can talk to 5,000 pastors and imagine the reach of people that collectively those pastors have, and the people who might be in services where they feel a little disconnected or a little separate from their neighbors, if I can help give people some tools to reach those people, and especially young people like myself who have very specific reasons for feeling like we don't belong in organized religion, that's good. People are going to be showing up at church anyways, so they might as well feel more connected to each other. So just kind of little thought experiments like that. And I've openly had conversations with the Exponential team about this of, I'm not a religious person necessarily. At the very least, I do believe in God. I don't identify as a Christian. And they literally interviewed me on video about this exact thing. Pretty much me saying, hi, I am a millennial who does not attend church, and here's why. And here are the things that if a church did them, I would attend church. So just like an interesting thing, I think, for anyone running like a big scale project to think about is there's going to be some morality that's threaded into this that's probably more nuanced than we originally think it's going to be. And who do we work with and why?
Yeah, exactly. And the different stakeholders involved are going to have their own interests and their own needs. And so you have to decide kind of where your lines are as far as where you're going to direct your energy. Certainly, if we start working with religious institutions in a more substantial way, suddenly reaching 1 million people doesn't seem so large. If anything, it starts to feel rather small.
Totally.
And
like there's churches that have 40,000 members.
yeah, and I think we've known from our research, you know, me with Gathering Summit and you with your book and with everything that you've been doing up to this point, people's relationship to spirituality, to religion is a big part of this equation. That I think it's not a coincidence that the rise of loneliness and the rise of religious disaffiliation are happening side by side. And so however somebody navigates their spiritual journey, I would say that that conversation is a non-trivial part of what it is that we're going to try to figure out. So, but at the same time, that's a really thorny, complicated area. And maybe that's been part of the problem, is that none of us wants to talk about it because we know it's such a sensitive topic for so many people. But at the same time, if we're going to make progress with this thing, we're going to have to probably at least broach the topic, which is where shouts to nuns and nuns for this, because there are ways that you can address this in a way that allows for everyone to be where they're at, right? So for those of you watching or listening who don't know, Nuns and Nuns, NUNS and NONES, is a gathering of women of the cloth and people who do not affiliate religiously to talk about God and spirituality and their relationship to it, and their fraught relationship to it in some cases. And hearing some nuns talk about the struggles that they've had with, you know, their relationship to the church as well, I think has probably made people who don't affiliate with the church feel a little bit more relatable with them. So yeah, that was cool.
Really. I had a conversation with a sister, a woman religious, kind of adjacently through that program, with someone who works at On Being, who wanted to experiment with me having a conversation with a much older nun. And she did something that I've seen a lot of religious people do that I was not expecting, which is she told me that I have a ministry. And I was like, what do you mean I have a ministry? And she said, she's like, well, you're doing work to help people feel more connected to themselves and to other people. In my mind, that is Christ's work, and you have a ministry. And when I was at Exponential as well, I was honestly expecting people to come up to me and try to convert me, because I've had that experience in the past in religious spaces. And the organizers were so thrilled because they gave me permission this year to invite as many secular community builders as I wanted. And so I had 20 people with me, none of whom, I won't say none of whom, but most of whom did not identify as Christian with me. And the organizers were so excited to talk to us because they said, I don't care if you're religious or not, seeing the work that you do to bring people together and to help them feel less lonely and more connected and like they matter, that's Christ's work. And just that felt really connecting to me, to say, wow, you see the work that I'm doing and you think that it's enough. You're not saying that I should be talking about Jesus. You're not saying that I should be talking about religion. You're zooming out and seeing that the work that we're all doing, any community builder, is actually deeply spiritual work, which it kind of like opened this closed gate in my heart to working with religious people. Because I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even, like, I went in with my guard up, assuming that they would be judging me, and was so surprised when in reality they were like, oh no, you're totally one of us. Like, we're all totally on the same vibe here. Yeah.
I'd say you probably, there's probably different people at different levels of judgmentalness in every stripe in every world, but I'm glad that you found that. And I feel like that speaks to a larger trend of people just wanting to find good answers, people wanting to find peace and spread peace for others around them. The fact that you got 20 people to come with you to that conference, which was two whole days.
I could not believe it.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible response. I feel like I could have a hard time getting 5 people to come to brunch for 2 hours, like that, to get 20 people to come to a conference like that. I just think, and inherently the people you invited are very busy people. I think it speaks to the importance people are putting in understanding the conversation that's going on now in the realm of religion and spirituality as it pertains to this larger issue of society and belonging and all the other belonging is just one part of this. There's all the other madness that's going on in the world that I think is related to this too. So
completely.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to their desire, because this is kind of how I pitched it to them in the email, is how rare it feels for me to be in a space with people who have a different belief system than me. Like, hey, you really want to expand your worldview and understand people better? Come hang out with people who, by their job title, see things differently than you do for 2 whole days, and hang out with them and like put your hands in the air and sing songs about Jesus. I'm going to a training this weekend that's kind of based around the same thing of how seldom we put ourselves in spaces where we feel in the minority and where we really feel genuinely like we don't belong, because that's where so much learning and understanding takes place about other people.
It's true. It's true. And that's the kind of thing that we want to be looking out for as well when we're thinking about the values and the attributes that we seek in the kinds of programs we want to promote is how might we be putting people in a position to be in a room with people they don't normally hang out with? And that's across generational lines and ethnic lines and economic lines, geographic lines even, right? That if you're hanging out with people that maybe are a little bit different from what you're used to hanging out with, you're probably going to learn something and you're probably going to understand the whole world a little bit better.
Totally. I guess I imagine next we could talk about one other problem that we were facing, which explains why we're having this video call in the first place. So one other problem the two of us are facing is that while we were having these meetings with people who are so incredible and giving us their time and giving us their energy, speaking for myself, I found I kind of got into this headspace of waiting for people to give me permission to do the thing. Saying, okay, if I make the pitch deck good enough, if we pitch this well enough, then someone will give us money, and that money is the equivalent of them saying, go. And I found myself waiting for that moment, which kind of actually put the progress for everything on hold. And I've talked to a few other entrepreneurs about this who totally resonated with getting into this rut of waiting for approval and forgetting that a few months ago, I had been doing literally everything for the Joy List by myself, no approval from anyone, no conversation with anyone. I was just doing it. And suddenly when money came into the question at all, I forgot that I have the ability to just keep creating and keep putting stuff into the world, which cut to now, the two of us saying that we're feeling a little stuck and we want to just remember we have the power and can be creating and getting this message out all the time. And yes, we will eventually need funding, but that doesn't mean that we can't keep creating now.
Exactly. And so what we're now doing as a result of all of the work we had done throughout the fall, once we hit Christmas, I know you and I had a conversation, and I remember lamenting kind of similarly, hey, I feel like we got to kind of be taking charge of our own story for a while. Let's work on growing the Joy List now with the tools that we have today. What are some small next steps we can take to make the Joy List bigger, make the Joy List more valuable for more people, get the word out, get more people excited about it, and start engaging that growing list of people outside of New York who want to help as well. And so part of that is talking more about what we've been doing so that the folks who are listening, watching this can know what we've been up to, and then potentially see the ways to get involved and help. And I think that's kind of where we're going now, and what I'm very excited about, which is us getting more stuff into the Joy List, not just what you can do, but what you can do. Not just things you can attend, but things that you can do, things you can create.
Yeah.
And then also spreading that.
What you can do, but what you can do.
So do you want to say a little bit more, Jillian, about what the next steps are, what the calls to action are, where we're kind of, where we're going, like where we're currently at, where we're going from here?
Yeah, sure. How about I say one and then we swap?
Okay.
Cool. I feel like I might have overtalked. So the first thing that we're creating is a directory of belonging. And there's a few reasons for doing this, but essentially it's a place where anyone, anywhere can put a community center or an event where when you go, you feel like you belong. And it doesn't have to be a big formal thing. It could be, oh, this group of people gathers in Cincinnati to work out at 5 a.m. Or in New Zealand, there's this amazing group for single moms to just get together and eat dinner and hang out. And I love it. Anything. And one that serves as a resource for anyone who goes to a new place and wants to quickly find out where these really wonderful community events and spaces, like a community center, for example, but also for it to be a basis for the Joy List expanding to other cities. Because it's one thing for us to say, okay, we're going to create a Joy List in Auckland, but we don't know anyone who lives in Auckland and we don't know anything that's going on in Auckland. Or if we have this directory to say, okay, we know 10 organizers in Auckland, we know about these amazing community centers, we know about this soup kitchen, we know about these event organizers as well. Suddenly, it seems way more realistic to have a Joy List there. And it's community centered. It's not just us reaching out to people. It's us reaching out to people who the community has brought to us. So it's starting to connect people to the project, to the Joy List, expanding it. beyond just what the two of us are doing.
Yeah, and so we're testing the waters with that already, just from the early results I'm seeing. So I mean, we found some incredible stuff already just in the last 5 days since you
Oh
first
yeah,
announced it, right?
totally.
Um, but there's also this issue of curation and how do we quality control? How do we make the determination of what kinds of things we want people to know about, or where do we put our energy towards? And at some point there's a line there, right? I mean, there are people who find belonging in really, really awful communities, and so
Yeah,
there's something that we have to do in terms of really figuring out, and that's probably honestly going to be a never ending challenge of constantly seeking what that balance is, but really
yeah,
refining what is the value system, what is the language that we use for determining the kinds of things we try to speak to. But I think for now, it's easy enough to say, pulling from what people submit, these things are almost certainly a home run and worthy of putting attention towards. And then over time, we'll get better at kind of creating the ability for people to kind of make up their own mind, or creating that space for those things to get figured out in an easier way. Um, and And then, yeah, I think so that's one call to action that we have ready now, actually. So for anybody who wants to help out with that, you can do that right now. You can submit to our preliminary form, which should be at joylist.nyc/directory. But just in case that doesn't work, there will probably be a link somewhere in proximity to where you are consuming this. But yeah, you can submit to that, and that's going to help us to get a better lay of the land as well.
yeah, for sure. I'm imagining when I write this up, I'm going to put all this stuff at the top because this is the most actionable,
Sure.
but also things that we're looking for help with. One, always venues for the Joylist Social, the monthly event that we host that helps New Yorkers make new friends. Finding a venue, especially with pretty much no venue budget, like we have a very low venue budget, is a huge, huge gift to us. And we do our best to promote the space on social media, give you a space to talk about what you do, promote you to our audience on all the platforms. And really, it's just a gift to 80 to 100 people who are looking to make new connections in the city, having a place to actually do that. So that's another thing that we're always looking for. And of course, sponsors for the Joy List. If you are a company who feels excited about community and community is part of your values and you want to be associated with projects that align with those values, supporting the Joy List is a huge way to do that, because we have a list of literally thousands of people who subscribed because they want more connections and they're excited and open to do new things, which I know from a company perspective is great. It's people who are down to do anything from coaching to retreats to checking out a new event, going to a new hotel, whatever. So if you're interested in sponsoring either the Joylist as a newsletter, the Joylist Social, this project to help 1 million people find belonging, or all of those things, we would love to talk to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
we would.
Thank you.
And engage with us on the socials too, right? We've got Bring the Joy, #Bring the Joy. But I would say in general, we're all explorers in this together in terms of finding the answers to how people create belonging for themselves and each other. And so if you find something on the internet that you think is a answer to this, tag us, tag the Joy List, tag Jillian on Twitter, because I don't think Joy List has a Twitter account yet, right? So tag Jillian, at that Jillian,
At that Jillian.
and use the #Bring the Joy, and let's work together to unearth all of these answers. And as we go, I think one of my dreams, Jillian, is that we end up turning the results of this into kind of a handbook that we can then distribute widely. I've got a whole bunch of co-working and community spaces all around the world that I really envision there being like a little brochure at the front desk with, here's how you can find and foster belonging in your city kind of thing.
Yes.
So I love the idea of us being able to really just get the word out about everything, all the great things that people can do to address this issue. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to get more people involved in this from this conversation onward.
Amen. I'm just going to dance now.
We've gotten to the dance break portion of the program. So
it's like, get out of your seats and dance.
Feel free to dance along with us. Imagine that, yeah, exactly. Someone just opened the bottle of like whatever in the commercial, and now like all of a sudden the colors have come down, and yeah, exactly. Yeah, Love Train is playing somehow. Yeah.
We have fun.
So how do we wrap this up? If you're not a subscriber to the Joy List, joylist.nyc. If you're outside of New York, go to the Add Your City button on the Joy List website, and you can register for the global newsletter. And we'll be engaging that a lot more soon. Joy List NYC on Facebook and Instagram. Otherwise, that Jillian on Twitter. And I'm Tony Bacigalupo. You could find me. I'm Tony Be Good on the socials as well.
And do you spell good Goode?
Oh, thank you for asking. Tony B, Goode. So like Johnny Be Good.
Exactly. Oh. No idea.
There it is. There it is.
All right. Goodbye, friends. See you on the internet.
This was so fun. We're going to do this again real soon.
Mwah.
Bye.